Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Very good. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone again to our continuation of the Narada Bhakti Sutras class. And this is our third session. The last time that we were together, we finished verse 6. So we will continue from there, beginning with verse 7. All right? Very good. So with that, I'll read verse 7. That bhakti, that devotional consciousness, is not of the nature of material lust, because there is a cessation of all material actions. All right, very important verse. Why would we think that this verse is of importance? Well, you remember previously, in the previous classes, I spoke about how, unfortunately, too many people today make the mistake of equating bhakti, this devotional consciousness, which is a concept which I think we've seen now for the last several classes. This is a philosophical concept par excellence. We can go very deeply into simply what is the nature of divine love. And yet, despite that fact, many people will confuse it with material love, with emotion, even with lust, literally with sex. It's interesting how in the material world, emotion is very important. However, emotion within the material realm is also very mixed. It can be, on the one hand, sometimes extremely pure, where our love for another is as selfless as it can be, as pure as it can be, with no adulteration, where we truly just love the other. But then on the other hand, of course, we've seen the opposite as well. We've all witnessed this in one way or another, where people will use their emotions, if anything, in a very base kind of way, or in order to manipulate others, or use others, or exploit others, etc., or in just a very selfish sort of way. So we've seen that when it comes to this vast spectrum of what we call emotion, this can be everything ranging from the lofty heights of divine mellows and rasas to something extremely materialistic. So this is why Narada makes this very important statement. And let me read this again, at least the first clause of this. That bhakti, that devotional consciousness, is not of the nature of material lust. Material lust. Why is it that one human being will find themselves sexually, and let's talk about this very bluntly, sexually attracted to another? Well, it's of course a base instinct. This is an instinct that every living being has, regardless of the species. This is an instinct that all animals have, all insects, certainly human beings, even the gods have this instinct, interestingly. But what is it based upon? Ultimately, exercised in the wrong way, it is based upon an illusion. Again, in the most base sort of form, what it's based upon is visual attraction. We see someone who has a certain appearance and we're immediately attracted to them. But this, of course, is the question that we ultimately have to always ask. Is that person merely that appearance? Is that person merely that handsome or that pretty form? See, when we base our attraction towards someone simply upon that surface level, what are we really doing? We're disrespecting the Atman that is within that person. We are disrespecting every other aspect of who that person is. What to speak of the spiritual? We're disrespecting that person's intellect. We're disrespecting that person's inner self, that person's dreams and desires and who they truly are, their personality. And instead, what are we seeing? That little surface level of skin, and allowing that to attract us toward that person and thinking that, oh, this is something of great significance. Well, this is what Narada is trying to explain to us, is that when we speak of bhakti, we're not speaking of that sort of quote-unquote love. Rather, we're speaking of a divine love that is based upon not merely an attraction of one body to another, an attraction of one person to another, but more than that. What bhakti is the inherent and natural attribute of the soul that gives us our ultimate and purposeful connection with the divine. That is bhakti. That is devotion. Thus, it's something that can never be muddied. It's something that can never be confused with, well, but I love so-and-so so much. Oh, that must be a type of bhakti. No, it's not. Not unless that emotion that you are experiencing, not unless that devotion that you're having toward that person is absolutely unadulterated by anything material. You see? So again, there's this distinction. Bhakti is not something material. It is the most spiritual form of consciousness that one can possibly have. Let's look at this second clause. Because there is a cessation of all material actions. Now, taken on the surface level, taken literally, what does this mean? Let me just read this again, and I want you to envision what a person looks like when they're doing this. So why is this the case? Because there is a cessation of all material actions. So, becoming like a statue, right? Of course not. All material actions, you see. Right now, am I acting? Am I moving? Am I speaking? Am I doing? Yes. Is it material? But wait. He has a material body. He's gesturing with his material body. Well, it must be material then. No, I am using the material in seva. I am using the material in service to the divine. Thus, even in using something material, because the intent is purely spiritual, again, because that bhakti is there, and thus, even the activities that I'm doing are in accordance with karma yoga. As a result, literally, every time I gesture in speaking truth, it is spiritual. And that's true for all of us. That's true for all of us. So with this understanding now, let's look at this one little clause again. Because there is a cessation of all material actions, now we begin to understand. We're talking about motivation. Because the individual who is practicing bhakti, because that individual has no material motivation but purely spiritual motivation, it is for that reason that they have the ability to express pure bhakti and to experience pure bhakti, to experience this pure devotional consciousness. Okay? So again, what is this verse overall saying to us? Really a pretty simple thing, and that is if we want to truly understand bhakti, our motivation must be 100% spiritual. Without any tinge of material calculation, without any tinge whatsoever of any material concern that, oh, why am I practicing this bhakti? Well, in the back of my mind, I'm really practicing it because I'm hoping, well, at some point God will be pleased with me and I'll win a lottery. You see? Even the slightest little tinge of material motivation makes this no longer bhakti, but makes it material. Simply material emotion, simply material attachment. Can we be materially attached to quote-unquote God? Yes, we can. If we see God as our bankster in the sky, then we have a material motivation toward our so-called attachment to God. If we have the idea that, oh yes, I'm so attracted to God because, well, I know I can get a lot of stuff from God. Well, again, that's a material motivation for our so-called attachment to God. Are we at that point really attached to God, or are we really attached to our own illusory, made-up concept of what God is, the bankster in the sky? You see, the truth of the matter is, with material motivation, God is not even involved. Even if we think we're being spiritual. So, this is very lofty. This is yoga. This is a very lofty goal. And this is the nature of liberation, is to eventually come to this point where all of our motivation, everything that we do, everything that we think, everything that we say, everything is focused with pure devotional awareness upon the divine for no other purpose than what? The devotion itself? Interestingly, not even that. Why do we have devotion toward the divine? Because it pleases the divine. See, that's even deeper than just having devotion toward God for the devotion itself. No, it's because it pleases God. It pleases Krishna. Thus we do it. Thus we have devotion toward Him. That's love. See, when we truly love another, do we simply love another for the sake of loving another, or do we love another because it pleases them? That's a little deeper. We love another because we see that they're happy when we love them. That's how we love. That's true love. So, let's go on to the next verse, verse 8. And this is an interesting verse. This is a very interesting one. Even more, such renunciation in devotional consciousness consists of transcending engagement in all social customs and Vedic ritualism. Oh, that's a radical verse. And this is a verse which, in the wrong hands, and I have seen this hundreds of times, and others have seen it at least a few times, taken into the wrong, nefarious hands by a materialistic individual who wants to pretend to be spiritual, this verse can be infinitely abused. Because on the surface level, what does this seem to be saying? It seems to be saying, oh, once you have bhakti, you don't have to follow any social customs whatsoever. Everything is thrown out, even the Vedic rituals, etc., etc., etc. That is not what this verse is saying. What is the evidence of this? Several evidences. Number one, practical evidence. What we have seen throughout the history of the great yogis, the great acharyas, the great bhaktas, the individuals who truly perfected themselves in what this book is about, Bhakti Yoga. What have we seen? That even they, upon achieving the highest attainment of bhakti, continued following the social customs and continued to follow Vedic ritual. The greatest of these individuals, by far, was Ramanuja. Ramanuja. Who was Ramanuja? Ramanuja lived to be 120 years old. Ramanuja was an individual who, when he was alive, was considered the greatest scholar, the greatest yogi, the greatest philosopher in all of Bhakti Yoga and all of Vedanta. He is an individual who wrote copious amounts of literature on Vedic philosophy and on Bhakti. He is an individual who achieved perfection in Bhakti, and yet, until the day he died, he followed all the social customs, all the Vedic rituals, all the Vedic injunctions, etc., even though he fits this description. So again, what this verse is saying is not that, oh, when we achieve liberation, well, that means we no longer follow morality. We no longer have to follow anything. Now it's a free-for-all. No, it's not what this verse is saying. Let's go a little bit deeper so we understand exactly what this is saying. More. Such renunciation in bhakti consists of transcending engagement. Again, let me emphasize that word. Transcending engagement in all social customs and Vedic ritualism. Now, are we starting to get a clearer picture? The individual who is liberated in such a manner that they have indeed internally reached a stage in which they have transcended what to speak of everything in this material world. They have transcended everything. They have transcended material desire. They have transcended lust. They have transcended so many things. They even have transcended religion. Now, that being the case, does it mean that they stop practicing religion? You see, an individual who achieves liberation, let me ask this question. Have they transcended the body? Of course. They have transcended the body in the sense that they now are situated in pure self, in pure consciousness. But do they still use the body? Of course they do. Of course they do. Any sage that you see throughout history, they have transcended the body, but they are still using the body as a vehicle. Why? Because they are within the material realm. Okay? They still eat. They still take bath. They still have to breathe, etc., etc., etc. It's not that upon liberation, the person just kind of pops out of existence. But they have transcended all these things. meaning that now they understand their nature, they use them simply as tools, they use the body as tools, they use clothing as tools, they use food as tools, etc., but understanding that they are indeed precisely tools, but they themselves within are situated on a transcendent plane, whereas everyone else is still situated in illusion, you see. But they still use all these material things. Well, in the same way, ritual. Is ritual eternal, or is ritual a means, an upaya, a means to an end? It's a means. Social customs, following varna, for example, being a brahmana, wearing a brahmana thread, following all the social customs that are found in the Vedic literature. Are these all something that will seriously apply once we are face to face with Krishna? You think Krishna cares if we are a brahmana once we are in Vaikuntha, face to face with him? No. But still being situated within the material realm, even the liberated being still observes all these things. He observes all these things because, A, it doesn't hurt to do so, even for his own sake, but more. Why does the liberated being, more importantly, continue to follow all of these rituals, all of these customs, all of the injunctions in the Veda? As an example to others. You see, if upon liberation, if a liberated being were to now say, all right, well, now I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to follow anything, wouldn't it be the case that every human being would follow that person's example? You see, now they would have an excuse. Well, so-and-so rishi, he took his Brahman thread, threw it away, and he's not following anything anymore because he's a liberated being. And, well, I've been on the path for 2 months, but look at him. Why can't I do that? You see, no. The liberated being follows, actually, if anything, more strictly than they did previous to being liberated, because they are serving as that perfect example. So that didactic function, that teaching function, is always important. And this is why, look at the life of any rishi, any liberated being, look at the life of any liberated yogi, look at the life of, again, any sage. And what you will find is that they follow all the rules stricter than anyone, even though, unlike anyone, they don't have to. You look at someone like Prabhupada. Today, by the way, is Prabhupada's appearance day. For those who don't know that, Prabhupada appeared today 119 years ago. You look at someone like Prabhupada, who was absolutely liberated, who had no connection to this world whatsoever other than his teaching mission. That is, other than his compassion toward those who were in ignorance, other than being here to teach others. He had no connection to this world. He was fully situated in Krishna consciousness, focusing upon Krishna 24 hours a day. And yet, he was so strict and so effortlessly so, you see, effortlessly so in his own life, that his most disciplined disciples could barely keep up with him and how strict he was. He would be up at about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning every day. He would get 3 hours of sleep every day, 7 days a week. And he was so strict with himself, his disciples, who were a third of his age, could not even keep up with him. That's how strict he was, even though he didn't need to be. He was already liberated. He was liberated before he came to America. So, again, if we have full understanding of what this verse is saying, it's not saying, all right, now that you have bhakti, become a hedonist. No, on the contrary. It's saying, you have indeed transcended all materiality, including even formal religiosity, because now you are situated purely in the transcendent. However, the way you conduct your life is, if you are liberated in the transcendent, you also have to understand and exhibit compassion toward all beings. And that means you follow everything stricter than you ever have in your life, but for you, because you're liberated, it's effortless. Other people have to struggle with vegetarianism. Other people have to struggle with alcohol. Other people have to struggle with cigarettes. Other people have to struggle with their sadhana, etc., etc. For the liberated being, it is effortless. Other people struggle with their minds when they're seated in meditation. The liberated being can sit down and they are in perfect samadhi from the moment their eyes are closed. That's the difference. All right, let's go on. Verse 9. Such devotional renunciation also means having perfect devotional absorption of one's consciousness in God, ananyata, and having complete indifference to anything that is opposed to such devotional absorption of self. Ananyata. Ananyata is the word that is used by Narada, and it means absorption of oneself in the divine. And unfortunately, there's no really good translation of this in the English. This is about the closest that I could come. What it means is what Prabhupada described as Krishna consciousness. What is meant by this is that our consciousness, within our consciousness, there is no greater concern, there is no greater awareness than being upon God, than being upon Krishna. To the point where, even though we retain our individual identity, and this is important, this is why absorption, that was the best word I could come up with. But unfortunately, when we hear the word absorption, what's the idea that we tend to have? Let's say you have a cup of water and you take a drop of water and you drop it into the cup, and the drop becomes absorbed into the cup and disappears. Oh, that's not what's meant by absorption. Rather, absorption of consciousness. Very big difference. Not absorption of self, but absorption of consciousness. You see, subtle, nuanced, yet distinct difference that is there. By absorption of self, what is meant is loss of self, negation of self, cessation of self into something greater. That's not what's meant. That's not what's meant. And truthfully, if we were to truly contemplate what that even meant on a personal level, it would come to atheism. Because it would mean complete loss of self, complete loss of awareness on our part, and awareness of an other, whatever that other is, becoming predominant to the cost of our own awareness. In other words, we would cease to be. I'm stating this in psychological terms, but we would cease to be. Rather, what true absorption in the spiritual sense means is absorption of consciousness. That is, that we, retaining our personality, retaining our identity, remaining an experiencer, drashter, an experiencer, everything that is of concern to us, and by concern, I mean not just intellectually, not just emotionally, that, oh, I have concern for someone. Meaning, everything that I perceive, everything that I choose by my will to perceive, everything that I wish to experience by that same will, I choose to make God alone. I want to only hear that which is connected to God. I want to only see that which is connected to God. I want to only feel that which is connected to God, and on and on. I want God, I want Bhagavan Sriman Narayana to be there in my consciousness from the first moment that I am awake and aware in the morning upon waking up from sleep. I want God to be there all throughout my day, regardless of anything that is happening. I want God to be the very last thing that I think of as I fall asleep. And even as I'm sleeping, when I dream, I want God to be there. That is absorption of consciousness in the divine. But you see, whose consciousness? My consciousness. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Not the wall's consciousness. If I were to say my goal is for the wall to have all these things, where does that leave me? It leaves me nowhere. That sounds silly, but really, this helps us to understand the difference between absorption of consciousness versus absorption of self. If we say absorption of consciousness, then we're saying, yes, I wish to become fully aware of the divine. If we say absorption of self, that's as if we're saying that I want to lose my own awareness to the point where I might as well say, oh, let the wall have that consciousness. Let the wall have that awareness. Because the I is no longer there in any sense. That's Buddhism. You see? Thus, this is why, very, very wisely, intelligent philosophers have always said that Shankaracharya and Advaita, Shankaracharya is a crypto-Buddhist. That philosophy falls ultimately, logically, to its logical conclusion, which is negation of self. No self. Okay? Very good. Such devotional renunciation also means having perfect devotional absorption of one's consciousness in God and having complete indifference to anything that is opposed to such devotional absorption of self. So, very interesting. These are just two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, we want devotional consciousness toward God. On the other hand, we are opposed to anything that stops that. So it's interesting to state this in the slightest nutshell. Prabhupada would say this. What is Krishna consciousness? Very simply, always think of Krishna and never let there be a time when we do not think of Krishna. That's simple. So again, this is simply the mirror side of the same coin. This is simply saying the same thing, but from two different perspectives. On the one hand, we want God consciousness, and we are opposed to anything that is the opposite of God consciousness. That's simple. That's simple. Well, we'll have questions a little bit later. All right, verse 10. Devotional absorption of self, that is ananyata, means giving up the shelter of all things that are not directly related to God. So now, this is a continuation of the thought that was in the previous verse, but the very last clause. It's basically just kind of repeating the same thing, but for added emphasis. So what is this absorption in the divine? It means giving up the shelter of all things that are not directly related to God. So in other words, by transcending materiality. Now again, what's interesting is these statements can sometimes on the surface level sound a little bit extreme. Well, what does it mean to give up materialism? What does it mean to give up material desire? What does it mean to give up material activity, etc.? And of course, people will interpret this in different ways. Some people going to the extreme of taking it very literally and thinking that, well, what it means to renounce all material desire, activities, etc., is that, yes, you become a full monk or a yogi with no possessions whatsoever. You can go to India and you'll see some yogis who will literally walk around naked. Maybe they'll carry a staff with them. Almost every yogi has a staff like this. That's what this is. This is a yogi's staff. That's why I carry it. And literally, this is all they'll have. And maybe a yogi pot like this. These are the signs of the ascetic. Otherwise, they'll be naked. Now, you'll notice I'm wearing clothes. Because I don't take it to that extreme. But some people will. Of course, in kind of a silly way. But at the same time, if it works for them, that's fine. This is the important point. Are we living in, let's say, India in the 12th century as naked sadhus? Simple answer, no. No, we're not. We're living in 2015. We're living in America. We all have jobs, we have responsibilities, we have families, we have cars. Yogis in 12th century India, didn't have cars. So what does it mean today, very specifically, to have this perfect absorption of one's consciousness in the divine? It means following the path of the Bhagavad Gita, which is non-different from what Narada is teaching us. What does Krishna teach us in the Bhagavad Gita? What does he tell Arjuna when Arjuna seems to want to artificially renounce the world? And, oh yes, I don't want to engage in any activities, etc. What does Krishna say to him? He says, while speaking learned words, you are acting like a fool. And he then goes on to explain to Arjuna that no, the way that we practice yoga is that we remain in the world. We follow our duty, whatever our svadharma is, whatever our specific nature is. We do that. If we're meant to be an artist, be an artist. If you're meant to be a warrior, be a warrior. If you're meant to be a priest, be a priest. If you're meant to be a laborer, be a laborer, etc. Follow your own inner nature, your own inner passion, but at the same time, focusing all of our awareness perfectly upon the divine with anything that we're doing. Never allowing our focus to stray even for a second from the divine. So this is precisely how we practice devotional consciousness today, bhakti today. It's not by artificially renouncing the world and trying to pretend that we're something we're not. You see, the yogi is wise, no? Or are they a fool? The yogi should be wise. And what is part of wisdom? Part of wisdom is living your life in accordance with the circumstances you find yourself in. Is that not wisdom? You look around you, you assess the situation, and then you live your life accordingly. And of course, accordingly meaning in whatever way will most greatly bring out who and what you truly are, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of the historical context or the nation or the culture that you find yourself in. You adjust however you have to, according to where you find yourself historically and in whatever society you are in, but always with the idea that knowing myself and knowing God is the ultimate. That is the wise yogi. Thus, what does a wise yogi look like today? You can't see, but I can see. I'm looking at them right now. These are wise yogis in Connecticut, in Austin, here in Omaha. Not naked, carrying nothing but a staff. No, dressed nicely with responsibilities, etc. But you're not at a Huskers game right now. If there's one going on, I have no idea. You're not at a Huskers game right now. You're not at a bar right now. You're not doing some materialistic thing right now. What are you doing? You're practicing yoga. Every individual here is practicing yoga. Right now, you're practicing bhakti yoga. And you are hearing transcendent sound, transcendent truth. So this is what it means to be a yogi today. Live your life, dress normally, have your job, be able to afford food, rent, mortgage, whatever, all these things. Take care of your children, love your children, raise them to be the most wonderful people that they can be. Be their guru, be their first guru. But with everything that you do, have the ultimate motivation be that you want to know God. That's why everyone is here today. Anything that, in even the slightest way, is an impediment toward knowing God, that's an impediment that must be removed if it can. That's how the yogi thinks. With other people, of course, it's the opposite. What does it mean to be materialistic? It means the accumulation of stuff, right? That's what it means to be materialistic, is that you want to accumulate stuff. Clothing, art possessions, cars, whatever you can think of, just more. These are impediments, you see. When we are being materialistic, we're literally doing the opposite of what the yogi wants. A materialistic person goes out of their way to have more impediments. What are these impediments? They're anchors. They weigh us down. Now, what makes them an impediment? Are they impediments inherently in and of themselves? So if I have 3 pairs of socks, I'm okay, but if I get 1 more, 4, well, now I'm suddenly materialistic, now I'm weighed down. You see? What makes something truly an impediment? Is it the thing itself? It's our attachment to that thing based upon illusion that makes it an impediment. The smallest thing can be an impediment if, to us, we are attached to it due to ego. A pen. I won't say who this is, you probably wouldn't know anyway, but I knew this famous person actually in New York. He had a favorite pen. It was a Mont Blanc, a very expensive pen. And oh my Lord, he would never let this pen out of his sight. He was so attached to this pen that it was always with him. And every so often, if you engage in conversation with him, he'd be talking to you and he'd kind of go like this. Just make sure, is it still there? And if you didn't know, you wouldn't even notice. He would just be speaking to you and just kind of check, make sure it's still there. A little pen. That's it, a little pen. And yet he was so attached to it, to the point where he couldn't even engage in a normal conversation with you. So again, is the quantity of something the impediment? Is the thing itself the impediment? No, it's our attachment to it due to illusion, due to ego. Yeah, there are several reasons for why a person becomes a ghost, but that's one of them. That often a person, when they pass away, are so attached to a place or a thing or a person that even when they die, their sushma sharira, their psychic subtle body does not move on, but it remains just due to that attachment. That's why often, of course, you'll have ghosts who are attached to houses, and usually not apartments. You notice that, it's hard to get that attached to an apartment, but you have a beautiful mansion, and you can get attached. So that's why often when you hear about hauntings, it tends not to be like a studio apartment. It tends to be some beautiful old mansion, and the person who lived there was just so attached to that place. They just loved the place so much that they just couldn't leave, literally. Yeah. So attachment is very strong. It's a very strong thing. We have attachment to things, objects, concepts, people. And all such attachments need to be transcended. We can be attached to anything that, well, let me put it this way. We can be attached in an illusory way to anything that is material. So that includes not just literal physical objects. That includes anything mental, anything intellectual, any memory. Are there not people who are attached to their memories? And a memory is not something that is grossly material. You can't touch a memory, but yet there are people who just live in the past. So yes, we can be attached to so many things, including even the subtlest of subtle things. Ego, ahankara, is the subtlest of things. That's why in this ontological, hierarchical paradigm, ego is considered to be the most subtle. And yet, that's the very first thing we become attached to, is our own ego, that first sense of artificial self, that attaching the sense of true self to something that is not self. That's the beginning of ego, of ahankara. And it's the subtlest of things, yet that is the very first thing that we attach ourselves to. Yeah, so attachment can be something that subtle, to attachment to my BMW, attachment to my mansion, attachment to anything, anyone. Yeah, and it meets the whole spectrum. Now, you'll notice I qualified myself by saying any illusory attachment, because there is one good attachment. We should be attached to God always. We should be attached to God and everything related to God. We should be attached to God, to truth, to Dharma, to Guru, etc. All the good things, all the transcendent things, that's a good attachment. That's a good attachment. Can we attach ourselves to a negation? The answer is no, obviously. So we can't attach ourselves to a negation. We can't attach ourselves to what in Sanskrit is called abhava, to non-being, something that is not. We must necessarily attach ourselves to something that is bhava, not abhava, something that is. So by saying that God is formless, beyond space, beyond time, beyond conception, achintya, beyond causality, etc., that's all describing the negation of God. That's describing what God is not. But if you're describing what something is not, that means that something also must be. There also is what God is, not simply what God is not. To simply say, I am not a car, I am not an elephant, I am not a house, I can go on like that infinitely, but ultimately it doesn't describe the important thing, who and what I am. In the same way, we can go on infinitely describing what God is not. Ultimately, that leads to dissatisfaction. Ultimately, we need to know what God is. And that's the only thing necessarily that we can attach ourselves to. Thus, yes, God is arupam. God has no material form. But that doesn't mean that God does not have svarupam, that God does not have his own transcendent form. But what is meant by form in this sense? Not something that we see with the eyes, not something that we can even conceptualize. Because even conceptually, we can approach some sort of idea of form. But no, God is beyond even that. Even that is arupam. Even that describes what God is not. Ultimately, what it means to attach ourselves to God is in the positive sense. Thus, this is why we worship Krishna. This is why we worship Narayana. In this sense, what we are encountering is that svarupa of God. And even then, of course, when we see images of God, so for example, we have on the altar Sri Radha Krishna. What are we really trying to do? We are approximating what it means to ultimately have that divine epiphany of being within the presence of the divine. Are we saying that God literally is that tall, made out of that material, etc., etc.? No. What we're trying to do with the Murti is to visually approximate the experience that we have in the presence of the divine. So how do we attach ourselves positively to that divine? Experientially. Experientially, within our consciousness. As far as practically how that's done, everything that we do, the mantra meditation, puja, etc., ultimately, however, a practice that I haven't taught anywhere yet, manasa seva, what Westerners would call visualization. Ultimately, in meditation, once meditation is perfected, focusing upon Paramatman within the heart, upon God within the heart, visualizing God to the point where that visualization corresponds with that ontological reality that is God within the heart, until the point where it's no longer visualization, it's a vision of the divine. You see that difference? We first visualize the divine such that we then have vision of the divine. And once we have that vision, it is not a vision of nothing. It is not a vision of formlessness. It is a vision of no material form. But what you then experience in that darshana, in that spiritual vision of the divine, is something that is beyond materiality, yet more vibrant than looking at the most beautiful, most powerful image that you can see within this material realm. That is what it means to not only become attached to, but have that ultimate vision of the divine. We begin with visualization. That's why we have puja. That's why we practice bhakti. With the idea of visualizing God, but ultimately wanting to have that vision of God. Does that make sense?